Why does a building constructed in 1873 have windows buried 3 meters underground? Not one window. Not two. Entire rows of them, perfectly symmetrical, clearly designed to let light into rooms that now sit beneath the street level. Rooms with ornate ceiling work, with ventilation systems, with architectural details that required sunlight to make sense. You can see them in Chicago, in New York, in St. Petersburg, in Melbourne. Cities separated by oceans, built by completely different cultures, at completely different times, all sharing the exact same impossible feature. The official explanation? The streets were raised. They'll tell you with absolute confidence that in hundreds of cities across the world, authorities decided simultaneously to bury the first floors of their most expensive buildings, their most elaborate architecture, and simply build new streets on top. Does that make any sense to you? Does it sound remotely logical that civic planners would choose to destroy the value of prime real estate, to render useless the grand entrances of banks and hotels and government buildings, just to raise a street? And they did this everywhere? At the same time? Using the same techniques? Look at the Chicago fire of 1871. The entire downtown burned, thousands of buildings destroyed. But here's what they won't tell you in history class. The fire was so hot it melted stone. It turned granite into liquid. It created temperatures that no wooden structures could possibly generate. Wood burns at around 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Stone melts at over 2,000. But somehow, wooden sidewalks and wooden buildings created an inferno that liquefied the foundations of the city. The official story says strong winds spread the flames. Strong winds. As if wind creates the kind of focused, sustained heat necessary to fundamentally alter the molecular structure of rock. This wasn't a fire. This was something else entirely. And within 2 years, they had rebuilt the entire city. Not just rebuilt it. They built it bigger, more elaborate, with more sophisticated infrastructure than before. How? Where did the resources come from? Where did the skilled labor come from in a nation that had just finished a civil war, that was supposedly still developing, still expanding westward into primitive territories? The World's Columbian Exposition of 1893, they tell you it took 2 years to build, 2 years to construct over 200 buildings, massive neoclassical structures with domes and columns, and intricate plasterwork spread across more than 600 acres. Buildings so elaborate, so sophisticated in their design that architects today study them as masterworks. And they built all of this in 2 years with horse-drawn carts and manual labor. Then, they demolished everything, destroyed it all within months of the fair's closing. The official reason? The buildings were only temporary, made of staff, a mixture of plaster and fiber. But photographs show structures that look like marble, like stone, like permanent architecture meant to last centuries. Why would you demolish something that beautiful, that functional, that expensive to create? Why not preserve even one building as a monument? They destroyed everything except a single structure. Everything else was burned, torn down, erased. Does that sound like the behavior of people who built something? Or does it sound like the behavior of people who found something and needed it gone? Look at the doors. This is something nobody talks about. Walk through any city built before 1900 and look at the doors of old buildings, not the modern renovations, the original doors. They're enormous, 3 meters tall, 4 meters. Doors that a normal-sized human doesn't need. Doors that make no ergonomic sense for the people who supposedly built them. You'll hear explanations about grand architecture, about making impressive entrances, but look closer. These aren't just decorative statements. These are functional doors with functional hinges and functional locks, designed for daily use. The handles are placed at heights that require reaching. The weight of the doors requires unusual strength to open. In apartment buildings, in office buildings, in structures meant for ordinary commerce and ordinary living. Why would you make everyday life more difficult unless you were adapting something built for someone else? Unless you were occupying spaces designed for different proportions? the heating systems. This is where it gets truly strange. Buildings from the 1800s have radiant heating systems so sophisticated, so efficient, that modern engineers can't fully explain them. Not speculation, not theory. Documented systems using principles we supposedly didn't understand until the 20th century. They used the thermal mass of the building itself, creating channels within walls that distributed heat evenly throughout entire structures without pumps, without fans, without any mechanical systems we can identify. The heat just moved, perfectly, consistently, through buildings with hundreds of rooms across multiple floors. We're told these were designed by architects in an era that barely understood thermodynamics, an era when most people still heated homes with fireplaces and stoves. But somehow these same people created climate control systems that we struggle to replicate today with all our technology, all our computer modeling, all our advanced materials. The math works, the physics works, but the timeline makes no sense. Then, there's the question nobody wants to answer. Where are the development stages? Show me the primitive versions. Show me the experimental buildings where they figured out these techniques. Show me the failures, the learning curve, the gradual improvement over time that accompanies any technological development. You can't, because they don't exist. These buildings appear fully formed, fully sophisticated, with no precedent. It's like looking at the pyramids. There are no practice pyramids. No small-scale models where they worked out the engineering, just sudden, complete mastery. The official narrative requires you to believe that architects went from designing simple structures to creating engineering marvels with no transition period. That craftsmen went from basic construction to executing complex thermodynamic systems with no experimentation. That cities went from dirt roads to coordinated urban planning with underground infrastructure in a single generation. This isn't how technology evolves. This isn't how knowledge develops. This is what it looks like when people inherit something they didn't create. Look at the photographs, not the famous ones, the ones in local archives, in historical societies, in the forgotten collections that nobody bothers to digitize. Photographs from the 1860s, the 1870s, the 1880s. You see cities, complete cities, elaborate buildings, paved streets, sophisticated infrastructure. But you don't see many people. The streets are empty, not just quiet, empty. You might see a few figures, often blurred, often in the far distance. Where is everyone? We're told these were booming times, periods of rapid population growth, cities filling with immigrants and workers and families. But the photographic evidence shows ghost towns, beautiful, elaborate, fully functional ghost towns. The exposure times, they'll say. Long exposure times required stillness, so moving people didn't appear clearly. But you can see carriages. You can see flags blowing in the wind. You can see details that required brief exposure times. So, why no people? Why do cities that claimed populations of hundreds of thousands look like abandoned movie sets? The orphan trains. Between 1854 and 1929, over 200,000 children were shipped from eastern cities to the Midwest and West. Official history calls it a charitable program, relocating orphaned and homeless children to families who would care for them. 200,000 children. Think about that number. That's not a social program. That's a repopulation effort. Where did all these orphans come from? What catastrophe created such a massive surplus of parentless children? The official story blames poverty, blames urban overcrowding, blames immigration, but the timeline doesn't match. The program started in 1854, during a period of supposed prosperity and growth. It continued for 75 years, generation after generation of endless orphans, and nobody questioned it. Nobody thought it strange that American cities were producing children faster than they could produce parents. Nobody wondered why photographic evidence from the same period shows those cities nearly empty. Look at what happened to the native populations. The narrative says disease and conflict, but the numbers don't work. Estimates suggest tens of millions of native people lived in North America before European contact. By 1900, Only a few 100,000 remained. That's not a gradual decline. That's a catastrophe. And it happened everywhere, not just in North America, Australia, New Zealand, South America. Massive indigenous populations, gone. Reduced to fractions of their former numbers in just a few generations. We're told this was conquest, colonization, the inevitable march of Western expansion. But the scale is wrong. The speed is wrong. Whole civilizations don't vanish that quickly from conventional warfare and disease. Not when they're spread across continents. Not when they're adapted to their environments. Not when they have thousands of years of accumulated survival knowledge. Something else happened. Something that affected populations globally. Something that left infrastructure intact while removing the people who built it. The mud flood. You'll find references to it in old newspapers, in journals, in personal accounts from the 1800s. Entire cities buried in mud. Not flood mud from rivers. Not mudslides from mountains. Uniform layers of mud that appeared suddenly, covering streets, filling first floors, burying entire neighborhoods. The official dismissals call these isolated incidents, local phenomena, exaggerated accounts. But you can find references from dozens of cities, across multiple continents, all describing the same thing. Mud appearing overnight. Mud that was dry and solid, not wet sediment. Mud that had to be excavated like archaeological dirt, revealing buried structures beneath. This is what they mean when they say streets were raised. They weren't raised. They were buried. And rather than excavate, rather than restore what was there, they simply built on top. Because what they found underneath was too difficult to explain, too sophisticated, too complete. Evidence of something that didn't fit the timeline they were constructing. The Great Fires. Every major city has one in its history. Chicago, 1871. Boston, 1872. San Francisco, 1906. But look at the pattern. These fires all destroyed the oldest parts of the cities. They all burned hotter than normal fires. They all led to rapid reconstruction using new methods, new materials, new designs. And they all coincidentally destroyed records, archives, libraries, the repositories of history. We're told these were accidents, tragic coincidences of urban development in an age of wooden construction and limited firefighting capability. But the targeting is too precise, the destruction too complete, the reconstruction too quick and too coordinated. It's as if someone was deliberately erasing evidence, clearing away what came before, replacing it with a narrative they could control. And after each fire, the new buildings looked different, more uniform, more consistent with the story they wanted to tell. The architectural anomalies disappeared. The oversized doors became normal. The buried windows were filled in. The evidence was cleaned up. The world's fairs, not just Chicago, Paris, London, Brussels, Barcelona. Dozens of them across the late 1800s and early 1900s. Each one featuring massive temporary cities built in impossibly short time frames and then completely destroyed. Look at the Paris Exposition of 1889. The Eiffel Tower was supposed to be temporary, scheduled for demolition after the fair. Why build something that sophisticated, that engineered, that expensive if you plan to destroy it? Why put that much effort into temporary structures, unless they weren't building them, unless they were repurposing them, unless these fairs were opportunities to display what already existed, to create controlled narratives around structures that people would otherwise question, and then destroy the evidence before anyone looked too closely? The official photographs from these fairs show buildings that don't look temporary. They show stone foundations, elaborate facades, infrastructure that would take years to construct. But we're told they did it in months with manual labor, then tore it all down. Does that make any sense? Or does it make more sense that they were showcasing existing architecture, creating public spectacles to establish ownership and context, then erasing what didn't fit? The architecture itself tells a story the textbooks ignore. These buildings from the mid to late 1800s display a level of craftsmanship that we can barely achieve today with computer-aided design and modern tools. The symmetry is perfect. Not approximate. Perfect. Stone cut to tolerances measured in fractions of millimeters. Decorative elements repeated exactly across entire structures. No human hand can achieve that consistency. Not without modern measuring tools, not without computer guidance, not without techniques that didn't exist in the 1800s. Yet there they are, buildings with thousands of identical elements, each one precisely placed, each one exactly matching its counterparts. The official story says skilled craftsmen did this by hand, by eye, using simple tools. But that's not how handcrafted items look. Handcraft has variation. It has personality. It has the slight irregularities that prove human creation. These buildings have none of that. They look manufactured. They look like they were produced using techniques we don't want to acknowledge. Look at the windows again. Not just that they're buried. Look at their construction. Single panes of glass, massive sheets, curved and fitted into frames with precision that modern window manufacturers struggle to match. Glass production in the 1800s was primitive. Making large flat panes was difficult and expensive. Making curved panes was nearly impossible. Yet these old buildings have them everywhere. Floor-to-ceiling windows with single sheets of curved glass fitted perfectly into stone frames. No gaps, no irregularities. No evidence of the kind of trial and error that accompanies difficult manufacturing processes. The glass is there, perfectly installed, in buildings we're told were constructed quickly and cheaply. Where did it come from? Who made it? How did they transport it without breaking it? How did they install it with such precision? The official history has no answers. Just assumptions that skilled workers figured it out, that techniques were developed and then somehow lost, that the past was simultaneously more primitive and more capable than we imagine. The basements. Walk into the basement of any old building in any old city and you'll find something strange. The ceilings are high. Not storage height, room height, living space height, with finished walls, with architectural details, with features that indicate these were meant to be inhabited. But they're underground, below street level, below the water table in many cases. Why would you build living spaces underground, where they're prone to flooding, where they're dark, where they're difficult to heat and ventilate, unless they weren't underground when they were built, unless the ground level changed? Unless these basements were first floors, and what we call the first floor was the second floor, and everything we think we know about these buildings is based on a landscape that was fundamentally altered. The evidence is everywhere. Staircases that lead down from street level into what should be utilitarian spaces but look like grand halls. Underground passages connecting buildings, elaborate tunnels with vaulted ceilings and decorative tile work. These weren't basements. These were streets. This was a city that existed at a different elevation, built for a different surface level, before something buried it, the atmospheric electricity systems. This is where the official narrative completely falls apart. Buildings from the 1800s are covered in metal spires, metal domes, metal ornamental features that serve no decorative purpose. They're positioned at specific intervals, at specific heights, following patterns that repeat across different cities, different countries, different continents. We're told these are lightning rods, simple safety devices invented by Benjamin Franklin. But look at the complexity. Look at the wiring systems inside these buildings. Metal channels running through walls, connecting to metal fixtures, creating elaborate networks that go far beyond simple grounding. These aren't lightning rods. These are collection systems, harvesting systems, designed to pull electricity from the atmosphere and distribute it throughout the structure. The technology works. Engineers have tested it. You can generate usable electrical current from atmospheric potential if you have the right collection apparatus and the right distribution network. But we're told nobody understood this in the 1800s. We're told electrical theory was still being developed, that practical applications were decades away. Yet there are the systems, built into the architecture, functional and sophisticated, waiting for someone to activate them. The star forts. Hundreds of them scattered across the world. geometric fortifications with pointed bastions arranged in perfect star patterns. The official explanation calls them military defensive structures, designed to provide overlapping fields of fire against attacking armies. But the geometry is wrong for that purpose. The angles don't optimize defensive coverage. They optimize something else: energy collection, resonance. The shapes match sacred geometry, the same patterns found in ancient temples, in crop circles, in naturally occurring energy phenomena. And they're always placed at specific locations. On elevated ground, yes, but more specifically on geological features, at intersections of underground water systems, at points where the Earth's natural electromagnetic field concentrates. These aren't forts, or they weren't originally. They're machines, power stations, built by people who understood principles of energy that we've forgotten or been told to forget. And the military use came later, when new occupants found these structures and repurposed them, not understanding their original function, seeing only the defensive potential of the thick walls and elevated positions. Look at the population records. City after city shows the same impossible pattern. The official census data will show modest populations through the early 1800s, then sudden explosive growth in the 1850s and 60s. New York goes from 60,000 people in 1800 to over 800,000 by 1860. Chicago goes from practically nothing to 300,000. These aren't normal growth rates. These aren't the gradual increases you see from birth rates and conventional immigration. These are replacement populations. These are cities being repopulated after being empty. And the demographic data is even stranger. The age distributions are wrong. Too many children. Too many young adults. Not enough elderly. Not enough middle-aged people. Population pyramids that look like disaster recovery, like the aftermath of something that killed selectively, that removed specific age groups while leaving infrastructure intact. But there's no disaster in the official record. No plague. No war. No catastrophe that explains the numbers. Just the assumption that cities grew naturally, that people came from somewhere, that the story makes sense if you don't look too closely at the data. The canals. Every major city from the 1800s has them, or had them. Not small drainage channels, massive navigable waterways, wide enough for boats, deep enough for cargo transport, running for miles through urban centers. With stone-lined walls, with lock systems, with engineering that rivals anything we build today. We're told these were built for commerce, for moving goods in an era before railroads and trucks. But look at the scale. Look at the precision of the stonework. Look at the hydraulic systems that maintained water levels, that managed flow rates, that operated without pumps or mechanical intervention. These canals used gravity, used the natural movement of water, used principles of fluid dynamics that we barely understood until the 20th century. And they were everywhere, under cities, around cities, connecting cities across vast distances, a continental network of water infrastructure that appears fully formed in the historical record, with no development period, no experimental phases, no gradual improvement. Just complete mastery from the beginning. And then they were filled in, covered over, turned into roads and basements and forgotten spaces. Why? Why destroy such valuable infrastructure, unless it was evidence? Unless it revealed too much about the capabilities of whoever built it. The resonant architecture, buildings designed to amplify sound, to channel vibration, to create acoustic effects that modern concert halls struggle to achieve. Not just theaters and churches, ordinary buildings, train stations, markets, government halls, structures with domes and arches and geometric proportions that focus and enhance sound waves in ways that seem almost magical. Stand in the right spot, and you can hear a whisper from 100 feet away. Clap your hands, and the echo returns with perfect clarity. These aren't accidents. These are engineered effects, requiring sophisticated understanding of acoustics, of wave mechanics, of resonant frequencies. We're told the builders included these features for aesthetics, for grandeur, for religious symbolism, but the precision is too exact, the effects too consistent. These buildings were designed to manipulate sound for a purpose, perhaps to communicate, perhaps to heal, perhaps to generate energy through resonance. Ancient texts talk about using sound to move objects, to affect matter, to create tangible effects from pure vibration. We dismiss this as mythology. But what if the technology existed? What if these buildings are the remnants of that technology, still functional, still capable, waiting for someone who remembers how to use them? The reset. Something happened. Something global. Something that emptied cities and buried civilizations and forced humanity to start over with tools and knowledge we didn't fully understand. The evidence points to the mid-1800s, maybe earlier, a period when the historical record gets fuzzy, when timelines stop making sense, when the official narrative requires too many coincidences and too much convenient forgetting. Look at the photographic record. The earliest photographs show completed cities, elaborate infrastructure, sophisticated architecture, but almost no construction. You don't see buildings being built. You don't see the massive workforce that would be necessary. You don't see the industrial capacity that such construction would require. You just see finished products, as if someone turned on a camera and documented what was already there. And then the photographs from just a few decades later show different cities, rebuilt cities, cities that look more primitive, more consistent with the technological level we're told existed in that era. What happened in between? Where did the original structures go? Why does the architecture devolve rather than evolve? The World's Fairs were cover stories, opportunities to display advanced technology and architecture while claiming it was newly built, temporary, contemporary. Look at the timeline. The major fairs align almost perfectly with the period of greatest historical confusion. Chicago, 1893. Paris, 1889. Philadelphia, 1876. Each one featuring buildings that looked ancient, that looked permanent, that looked like they'd been there for centuries. But the official story insisted they were brand new, built in months, scheduled for demolition, and people accepted it because the alternative was too disturbing. The alternative meant admitting that these magnificent structures existed before the current civilization, that they were remnants of something lost, that history as taught was fundamentally wrong. So they went to the fairs. They marveled at the buildings, they took photographs, and then they watched as everything was destroyed, the evidence erased, the questions buried under official explanations and moving forward in progress. The intentional destruction of knowledge. The Library of Congress fire of 1814. The burning of the Alexandria Library. Countless monastery fires across Europe. Archive fires in city after city during the 1800s. Every major repository of historical records has a fire in its past. Every collection of old books, old maps, old documents has a convenient disaster that destroyed the most valuable items, the most ancient texts, the records that predated the accepted timeline. We're told these were accidents, that fire was a constant danger in ages of candle lighting and wood construction. But the targeting is too precise. The loss is too specific. The fires always destroy the oldest materials, the unique documents, the records that can't be replaced, while leaving newer materials largely untouched. As if someone was editing history, removing evidence that contradicted the narrative they were building, ensuring that future generations would only have access to approved information. Look at the maps. Old maps. Maps from the 1600s and 1700s. They show land masses that don't exist anymore. Islands in the Pacific, continents in the Arctic. Detailed coastlines that are now underwater or ice-covered. We're told these were errors, that early cartographers made mistakes, that explorers reported fiction. But these maps come from different sources, different countries, different time periods. They agree on details. They show consistent geography. They include latitude and longitude coordinates that are mathematically precise. These aren't guesses. These are survey maps created by people who actually visited these places, who measured and recorded what they saw. But the land is gone, changed, transformed by some geological event that the official timeline doesn't acknowledge. An event that reshaped coastlines, that raised and lowered sea levels, that fundamentally altered the planet's geography within recorded history. And we're supposed to believe it never happened, that the maps are wrong despite their precision, that dozens of independent sources all made the same elaborate mistakes, the technology regression. This is perhaps the most damning evidence. Technology doesn't go backwards. Knowledge doesn't unlearn itself. Yet the historical record shows exactly that. Roman concrete that we can't reproduce. Greek metallurgy that produced steel stronger than modern alloys. Islamic optical devices that achieved magnification we didn't rediscover until the 20th century. Every ancient civilization shows evidence of capabilities that exceeded what came after. We call this the Dark Ages. Blame it on the fall of civilizations, on the loss of trade networks and learning institutions. But that doesn't explain the pattern. It doesn't explain why the regression was so complete, so total, so global. Unless it wasn't regression. Unless it was reset. Unless something destroyed not just the civilizations but the knowledge base, forcing survivors to rebuild from fragments, from incomplete understanding, from inherited technology they could maintain but not recreate. We are those survivors. We are living in the ruins, using tools we found, occupying buildings we discovered, following instructions we don't fully comprehend. The official timeline requires you to believe in miracles. It requires you to believe that primitive civilizations achieved engineering feats we can barely match, that they did this with simple tools and manual labor, that they built massive structures in impossibly short time frames, that they achieved precision that requires modern technology without having that technology, that they created elaborate infrastructure networks without understanding the principles that make such networks function, that they did all of this and then forgot how. Forgot completely, lost every trace of the knowledge and capability, and then descendants with no connection to the original builders somehow rediscovered just enough to maintain the structures, but not enough to understand or replicate them. Does that make any sense? Or does it make more sense that we're looking at evidence of a previous civilization? A global civilization, one with technology and knowledge beyond what we currently possess. One that was destroyed or destroyed itself, leaving only ruins and fragments and repurposed structures. Look around you. Really look. Look at the buildings that survived from before 1900. Look at their scale, their precision, their sophistication. Look at the infrastructure underneath your cities, the tunnels and channels and systems that predate modern utilities. Look at the anomalies, the buried windows, the oversized doors, the architectural features that make no sense in the context of the official story. Look at the maps that show different geography. Look at the population records that show impossible growth. Look at the photographs of empty cities and endless orphans. Look at the pattern of convenient fires and destroyed records. Look at the world's fairs that appeared and disappeared like stage sets. Look at the technology we can observe but can't explain. The evidence is everywhere, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the obvious questions. Why is this buried? Who built this really? What happened to them? What happened to us? We are not the builders. We are the occupants. We are living among the ruins of a civilization far greater than ours, trying to understand systems we inherited, maintaining infrastructure we discovered, following patterns established by people we've been taught never existed. The official history is a construction, a narrative built to explain what couldn't be explained, to provide comfort in the face of disturbing evidence, to give us a linear story of progress and development when the reality is cyclical catastrophe and forgotten knowledge. They called it Tartaria. They called it the Old World. They called it the antediluvian civilization. The names don't matter. What matters is that it existed, that it was global, that it was sophisticated beyond our current capabilities, and that it was destroyed. Something reset humanity. Something buried our cities and erased our memories and left us scavenging among the remnants. We rebuilt. We repopulated. We created new stories to explain the world we found ourselves in. And those who knew the truth, those who controlled the narrative, made sure the evidence was buried, the questions discouraged, the alternative explanations dismissed as conspiracy and madness. But the evidence remains. In every city, in every old building, in every buried floor and oversized door and impossible timeline. We are living proof of our own forgotten history. We are the survivors of something we don't remember. We are the inheritors of knowledge we've lost. And somewhere, someone knows the truth. Someone has the records that were supposedly destroyed. Someone has the maps that show the real geography. Someone has the technology that was supposedly primitive. Someone is keeping the secret, because the truth would shatter everything we believe about ourselves, about our history, about our place in the timeline of civilization. The truth would reveal that we are not the pinnacle of human achievement. We are barely recovering from catastrophe. We are children playing in the ruins of giants. We are pretending to be the builders when we are merely the occupants of what someone else created. The question isn't whether this happened. The evidence proves it happened. The question is what comes next. What happens when enough people see the buried windows and ask why? What happens when enough people notice the patterns and demand answers? What happens when the official narrative can no longer contain the contradictions? Because history repeats itself. Cycles continue. And if we don't understand what happened before, we're doomed to experience it again. The reset, the catastrophe, the forgetting, unless we remember. Unless we question. Unless we stop accepting the story we've been told and start investigating the evidence we can see. The ruins are all around us. The truth is buried under our streets, and time is running out to recover it before the cycle begins again.